Good evening and welcome to the March 9th Board of Education meeting. I'd like to first invite you to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we get started on our business meeting tonight, I do want to take the opportunity to introduce Mr. Joseph Foligno, who is our newest Board of Education member. He joined us at our workshop meeting officially last month, but this is the first meeting, regular meeting that he is at on camera. So, Joe, welcome. We're so excited to have you. I also want to ask the board if we can make an addition to the agenda tonight and move an item. So first I'd like to ask that we add to the agenda item 9.7, a vote on a $50,000 reduction to the budget coming out of the Board of Finance. Is there a motion to add that item?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so that is 9.7. And the second thing I'd like to ask is that we move the student representative reports up just prior to the legislative update so that our students can give us their report, but then they have the opportunity to go if they have other pressing homework or other needs. Is there a motion to do that?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Excellent. So we are going to turn this over to you right away. Thank you for coming.
So, beginning with GHS, girls hockey won their SEC game last week, giving GHS their 6th SEC title just so far, which is a league record. Boys hockey played rivals hand today for the first round of states, but unfortunately got knocked out. Boys basketball states game is coming up, and girls basketball season has concluded. Wrestling has completed their state tournament, and the Connecticut SAT is on March 25th for all juniors at Guilford High School. Other classes and events are scheduled for the other 3 grades.
As for fencing, the boys won 2nd overall and the girls won 1st place. And both teams have worked very hard all season, and now the season is coming to an end. For physics team, they competed in the teams competition, which stands for Tests of Engineering Aptitude, Mathematics, and Science, and they are currently waiting on the results. Parent-teacher conferences are this coming Wednesday and Thursday. They're 1 to 3 o'clock on Wednesday and 6 to 8 on Thursday. And finally, the Woolsey Hall concert is Friday, March 20th.
Covering Adams, the Adams has an R-word video to the entire school. They viewed the movie called The R-Word on Wednesday, March 4th in their homerooms. Students watched the video and participated in a discussion about what they saw and what they hear every single day in school. Students generated ideas about increasing inclusion and changing behaviors, and the video was sponsored by Septo and Sarah. Adams Unified Sports sponsored the Fill the Bleachers game on February 27th against Walsh Intermediate School from Brantford. Adams held their annual badminton tournament during the week of February 10th. Champions were crowned in the ladies' doubles, men's doubles, and mixed doubles, where students were paired up with faculty members as teammates. Adams' 8th graders attended freshman orientation on February 26th, and students and teachers are in the process of planning activities for the 50th anniversary of Earth Day on April 22nd.
For Melissa Jones School, Miss Renee Soares joined Melissa Jones School for a week of studying Adinkra symbols, which are used in textile and pottery design in West African countries, specifically Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. Adinkra symbols focus on concepts allowing for some flexibility in translation, which in turn gave students the freedom to organize a paper quote square in meanings relevant to their unique voice. And similarly, students also chose how to split their colorful squares into geometric patterns and shapes, which correlates with the symbols. To wrap up a unit on energy transference, grade 4 students also went to the Eli Whitney Museum in Hamden on February 25th. And while there, students constructed a model out of a house with a power source and connected positive and negative test bars with contact points. They also made switches to test different configurations of incandescent and LED lights. It was also Read Across America's Week. So during this year's week at Melissa Jones, each classroom welcomed guest readers from the Guilford community, including officers from the police department, members of the Board of Ed, and Guilford Public Schools administration, as well as others from local organizations. Visitors shared books that students took across America and highlighted how literacy impacts their daily lives and work in the community. Students also celebrated literacy with Dr. Seuss Spirit Days, a performance of Hansel and Gretel, and brought in donations for our first Give a Book, Get a Book school-wide swap to share their love of reading. And next at Baldwin Middle School, every other day, Baldwin students participate in an hour period dedicated to enrichment activities. These are non-graded, self-directed opportunities for students to explore an area of interest, with teachers acting as facilitators. Some of the most powerful examples take place during this time. And one example is students took part in the process of conceptualizing an invention. Last Friday, they participated in a showcase where they spoke about their invention to their peers and to their family members. These presentations included background on the inspiration, the reflection, and the experience of being an inventor. Other enrichment activities that students are currently participating in include robotics, the stock market game, readers' theater, projects that combine math with art, coding and design projects, and more. The Baldwin Middle School PTO is also sponsoring their first school-wide STEM fair. Students participate in this opportunity voluntarily, and they take time to figure out how things work, or they explore an engineering or science topic. And on Thursday evening, March 26th, their young scientists and engineers will showcase their explorations for family, friends, and Baldwin staff. The students and the staff thank the PTO for sponsoring the STEM fair, and they hope it will become an annual event. Finally, the grade 4 to 5 transition from elementary to middle schools. They are beginning this process, and parent information nights are scheduled for May 18th and 19th. The students from our 4 elementary schools will visit Baldwin Middle School on the 28th or the 29th of May.
In February at Guilford Lakes, kindergartners and 4th graders participated in a video chat with an author, Laura Reynolds. She read student-written stories, and she answered some of their questions. Parents also visited classes to read their children's stories. 2 of the grades did skits during an assembly to show the importance of kindness and how it can all start with hello. The 4th grade Community Service Leadership Committee led a successful diaper drive. The Sarah Readathon has begun, and it will benefit those in assisted living situations with disabilities. 4th graders have started their colonial unit with a dive into an artifact trunk and playing colonial games. The group called Boogie Chillin', sponsored by the PTO, visited the kids to teach them all about the history of American music. The science fair was successfully held on March 5th with 115 young scientists sharing their projects with their families. And the PTO is working hard to raise funds to build a new playground and has raised over $7,000 of its $50,000 goal.
Wow.
Thank you.
Excellent. Any questions or thoughts or comments from the board? Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing. Terrific. All right. So next on the agenda, we are very lucky to get a legislative update from Senator Christine Cohen, Representative Sean Scanlon, and Representative Vinnie Candelora, who are here to join us. Thank you.
Hi.
Welcome. Hello.
It's fun being at this table again.
It's been a little while.
Yeah.
Welcome. Thanks again for coming. I think probably there may be a couple of us have some questions, but I think what we'll do first is turn it over to you and let you present, unless you'd prefer to do it a different way.
That's fine.
Okay.
Fun.
What can you tell us?
You want to start?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, it's great to see you as the chair.
Thank you.
It's my first time being here since you've taken over, so congratulations.
Thank you
And
very
to
much.
John and Joe and Kristen, welcome to the board. Look forward to working with you as the delegation and on behalf of the district. I think I'll just start with the most timely and pressing news, which is that Paul and I were on a conference call a few hours ago with the governor and his team. I don't know if Vinny was on the call. I know Christine had a conflict, but, this is a rapidly changing and dynamic situation, and all of us are doing our best to understand both what is coming down the pike and what we should be communicating to you. And I will sort of let Paul give you a further update of what that specifically means for the district. But I would just say to you that, number one, I think the governor and his team should be really applauded for the amount of communication that they are doing. I've been in this job for 5 years, and I think that they've been very, very communicative with this, and almost to the point of oversharing, which I think is no such thing in a crisis like this. So I think that's very good. Second is that the most recent guidance that we got from them today dealing with schools had to do with the fact that they are not making any sort of announcement right now about closing schools. They're going to continue to monitor this. They've given, the education commissioner gave a little bit of update about what it might look like should we have to go down that path, which nobody wants to do because of the ramifications of what that would mean. And I think that in terms of our own community, they are recommending that we limit gatherings of over 100 people. So for example, I'm going to cancel my St. Patrick's Day breakfast next week, which I hate to do, but we have to consider this. And I guess last thing I'll just say is to stress that while there is no imminent threat that we know of here in Guilford, this is something that has sort of breached beyond containment into community transmission. And while the state is still very much expecting, and the state epidemiologist was telling us on this call that they don't expect widespread transmission, it is likely that more and more people in Connecticut are going to get this. And obviously the mortality rate hopefully will continue to be low, but more and more people will get this, and we obviously have to take it seriously, but not panic. And so as we get more information as a delegation, we'll of course share that with you. I know that Paul is going to continue to get invited to these calls, but from coronavirus's perspective, I think it's more of just a wait and see, and hopefully we will work together along with Matt Hoey and the rest of the team to make sure that Guilford is fully prepared and that you will have all the resources that you need. One last thing I would just mention that I've sort of been roped into as the chair of the insurance committee is this notion of all these people who have had paid for trips either out of the country or to places in the United States. And the governor's administration and the insurance commissioner are working with us to try to see if there's a way that we can deal with travel insurance, not necessarily covering this as things stand now, but knowing that if the governor was to declare a state of emergency and things were to change, then some of those policies would be eligible for utilization. And all of that is, again, a changing and dynamic situation. Certainly share more information when I get that from that end.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think from a legislative perspective, we are suspending activity on Thursday and Friday to clean the buildings, and we have limited activities there. So we're sort of limiting the events to public hearings and to committee meetings. We've canceled school tours and those type of, activities and activist events. And the leaders are getting together on Wednesday, and we're going to make a determination of what we do going forward. I think nobody wants to push the panic button, but if we look at what happened in Italy, in New York, and in Washington, people didn't react quick enough. So our intent is to take this very seriously and just try to limit the exposure. And I guess, I know with that, we could certainly talk about legislation
Yeah,
as
talk
well.
a little bit about some education legislation. I don't think any of us are on the education committee.
I'm
but there,
off now. I was on it.
Yeah,
but
there's a couple of big things that are happening in education. Several curricula-related bills. One, I think, is to require the teaching of climate change. Another is around Native American studies, and I think a third deals with something that a lot of people ask about, sort of personal finance, and including that into some sort of civics curriculum. So those will be interesting, and we'll watch those. It's still really early on in the process, so these are all obviously proposals that are just receiving hearings and can certainly change dramatically as the session goes on, or not even be moved forward at all. Another one that we've been really watching and actually just talking about is this idea out of the Connecticut School Finance Project about co-oping, so that we can sort of see a leveling out of special education payments. And there's a lot of concern over that, rightfully so. I think the calculus for that isn't exactly clear at this point. And so that had a hearing today. I was hearing a little bit about what was going on, but a lot of superintendents coming forward against that legislation the way it's proposed currently. Obviously, nobody likes the fluctuations being on the other side of this. I remember how hard it is to budget year after year with all these special ed fluctuations and ECS funds, and not knowing where we're going to stand. But certainly we don't want to be at a detriment, even more of a detriment, because of legislation that could put Guilford and other districts in a bad position and ultimately paying more. One thing that's really interesting, as a former Board of Education member that was on the School Start Times Task Force, is there is a legislative proposal for a working group on school start times, which, as somebody who was on the School Start Times Task Force, and it was so very difficult to do something district by district. I know we had a lot of conversations about how this would impact sports and busing and all of these things, and if there was one thing that would help is if we went, to a later start time across the board for the state of Connecticut. And that's something that deserves some talk and certainly a working group on it. So I am in favor. I went and testified before the Education Committee earlier this week on that matter. Connecticut is notoriously one of the worst states in terms of school start times. We're one of 4 states that on average starts before 7:45 a.m. So it's definitely something that we need to look at in light of AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and CDC guidance that says high school students should not start before 8:30 a.m. So we'll be looking more at that, and I hope that legislation moves forward, so at the very least we can get more folks looking at this, going forward, so.
And I would just add two additional things. Number one, Ethan's Law, which all of us worked really hard on last year, the State Board of Education is actually voting in the first week of April on the curriculum that the law mandated them to design and then provide for local districts. So that should be something that would be disseminated to all the different districts across the state sometime in early April, which is great, and I'm really happy about. And the second thing was that Christine and I were here last week for the Getting Rid of the Hateful Words campaign that was here. It's the 4th or 5th time that I've been here. And as an alum of Guilford High School, it's just very cool every time to come back here and see more and more students sort of gathering around that table and being a part of that effort, which was certainly not going on when I was here. And it's very inspiring to see the students that are leading that effort. So just want to put that on the record.
Thank you. And then I think the last piece, Public Health heard a piece of the bill today on sort of sick buildings. I think that's sort of a new push we're going to start seeing. I don't think legislation will move forward this year, but we did have the CEA attorney testify that growing number of the workers' compensation claims, the 2 issues revolve around teachers injured from assaults and from illness from buildings. So there's some guidelines that are being drafted in public health. I think they're not workable yet, and I think it's something that we're going to just hear more about, and how to provide funding for that for buildings that might not be able to keep proper temperature or may have mold. How does that get remediated? What's the process? So that seems to be a new thing that's rising through the building.
Excellent. Are there board members that have questions about anything that was brought up, or other questions? No question?
Yes. Can you give us some background on why the reimbursement for the state for Guilford goes down every year, and why some of our adjoining towns like New Haven, it goes up every year? I mean, at some point, when it goes to 0, what happens? Is it sort of like negative interest rates? I mean,
So I guess I would say this, and I'm going to answer this question twice, or in two different ways. The first is that since I've taken this gig, I have successfully been able to, with different compositions of this team, with Vinny and Ted, and then now with Christine, to stop complete eradications of our money. The last two state budgets completely wiped us out and said we were going to get $0 right away, and then we've been able to minimize those cuts. But as I've said to both Paul and this board and Matt Hoey, the cuts are going to continue to come. And the reason for that is because we have a serious problem at the state level with our budgets, and there's only so many places that we can go to make cuts. Unfortunately, ECS was always a sort of third rail, but we just have nowhere else to go. And that is at the same time that the challenges from an educational perspective are rising in a place like New Haven. We have to try to find a balance between where that funding can be put to best use and what is the way that we can do that. I don't feel like completely getting rid of our funding in one fell swoop is responsible, but I do understand that we can work as hard as we can as a delegation on a bipartisan basis to stop the worst of the cuts, but the cuts are going to keep happening unless something substantially changes. And I just think that that's the new reality that we unfortunately live in when it comes to the state budget.
And so just to add to that too, over the years, the ECS formula, which is our funding source, really disappeared. We were ignoring it. So every year we had this maintenance of effort. So whatever a town got last year, the previous year they would get it again. And there was a lawsuit brought a few years ago saying you can't do that, it has to be a true formula. And the court had ruled in favor of the plaintiff. It was going to the Supreme Court, and when we had crafted the bipartisan budget, both parties got in the room, we decided we need to address this issue rather than let the courts decide. And so we created a true ECS formula that's based on income levels, English as a second language, how many kids are getting free and reduced lunch. So this formula, and also student population. So the formula is tied to all those metrics. So the numbers are going to change every year. And so there could be times, like you saw Branford see an increase, because when the true formula was implemented, it was shown that, you know, Branford had needs that the state was not fulfilling under a true formula. North Branford and Guilford, I know, saw decreases. And that's something that's going to track out over, 10 years. We could always get you projections of what it's going to look like 6 years from now or 7 years from now. So you could plan long term. I guess that's the benefit of it. So it may go up, it may go down. It depends on your population. And a lot of towns that are going down is because the formula is being implemented over 10 years. Because, for instance, I know in North Branford, we were going to see $1 million cut. And we said, that's too drastic. So we're going to phase this in over 10 years. So the cut is a little bit more gradual. And so we could get you those numbers, but that's sort of what's happening right now, why that's happening.
Yeah.
And
And
the work-
Sean, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to compliment you all.
I was gonna do
The
the
work
same,
that you
yeah.
did to get away from a
Yes.
two-year phase-out
Right,
and to
that's-
move
that's
us
what I was just gonna
into
say,
something
yeah.
that we could see and plan for was very important and very much appreciated at the district level.
And I just want to echo that, having just gone through, right, we're in the middle of another budget season, but when I think of our discussions this year and in the past few years, a discussion has not been happened that did not recognize the fact that we expected to see greater cuts, and the work that you are doing for us up at the state level has meant that we have not seen them in the way that we feared or even expected. So a great deal of appreciation for the work you're doing on our behalf, for sure.
And I'd say we just have to keep an eye on it, because even in the last budget cycle, we saw another, sort of proposal to speed up this progression. And we had to work again to dial that back and make sure that we realize the same savings that well, not savings, but the same progression that we had planned for. So we just have to keep an eye on it and make sure we're all communicating.
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I was really happy to hear that you're working on start times, and there's a task force. Can you help us understand, a little bit more about what that looks like, and maybe a time frame where there might be a bill proposed, or, how does this process move forward, and how quickly might we see something?
So the bill was just proposed, and they
Okay.
just had a public hearing on that bill this week. So the next step would be for the committee to decide whether or not to bring action out onto the floor. It's a House bill, so it would come out in the House first, and then, then go on to the Senate. So we'll just have to watch. I can keep you all informed as to where it is in process if you want to write to committee members and let them know how you feel about it. But I can certainly pass information on as well, letting them
Christine,
know
did you
that
say
you're in
which
favor.
committee it's coming from?
It's education.
It is coming out of the
Yes.
committee, okay.
And what does the bill allow for? What is?
It's for the creation of a working group.
Okay.
It doesn't have a lot of language in it right now. So it's the creation of a working group to determine basically, how the state could move forward if they were to implement a statewide start time for high schools in particular.
Well, and I think that's a thoughtful way to go, because I think if the bill overly aggressively came out with an 8:30 edict, it would run into such resistance that I think it would be a non-starter. I think starting the conversation is a smart way to begin.
Right.
So if the committee recommended an 8:30 start time, would this would go to the governor? How would that proceed?
So if the committee
Yeah.
recommended it, then there would have to be probably some legislation that would be put in place to, along the lines of the proposal of the working group. And then that
okay.
legislation can be modified as well, needs a public hearing. So it does have a long haul, but it's
Okay.
a promising first step.
Excellent, thank you.
Have other states mandated start
California
times?
just did. They have not implemented the change yet, but the law is in effect, and I believe they need to do it by next school year, if I'm not mistaken.
We have a couple of new members of the board, as well as, I think it's just useful for all of us. Would each of you just remind us what committees you're on, just because we think that's useful information, although I think we're fully aware that you are our resource on education and all other kind of issues if we have them, but.
Sure. I am the Senate co-chair of the Environment Committee. I am also vice chair of the Commerce Committee. I'm seated on Planning and Development, and I'm seated on Children's. And Children's actually has I often
Right.
sees a lot of legislation that would, pertain to the schools. So,
Terrific.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I chair the Insurance Committee, and
Right.
I'm on Public Health and the Finance Committee.
Terrific.
And I am on the Finance Committee, the Public Health Committee, and the General Law Committee.
Excellent. All right. Are there other questions that people have, or?
If I may, I just want
Yes, please.
to, I'd like the board to know, I'd like to thank all of you once again and make sure that the board is aware of the fact that these three representatives pick up the phone every time I call. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate being able to rely on you as resources, and that you're willing to listen when I call with an opinion on a pending bill like the Special Education Collaborative. We've got really good support and really good friends in Hartford, and we're very appreciative of all that you do for us and all the support that you do offer to us here in Guilford and in our schools.
Here.
Could I ask one more question on top of that, which is, do we have a sense of where that discussion around this collaborative might go? Where exactly are we with that?
There was testimony, there was a hearing today, and I haven't heard reviews yet on
Okay.
how that went. But I know there was an open hearing today, and I know that CAPS is very much opposed to the legislation in its current form and is working very much against the legislation.
I think there are concerns, right, about how financial expectations will be kind of calculated.
It's a
Isn't that-
big change without a lot of detail. My biggest concern is that it will change how we receive excess cost reimbursements possibly removing what we currently receive in excess cost reimbursement, but we don't know exactly how that's going to look. The bill will establish the cooperative and name a board, and the board will then create all of the specific detail, but it doesn't come back to the legislature for approval after all the detail's been created. And to me, that is dangerously incomplete. Guilford could lose all of what we currently receive in excess cost funding. And I've complained about the volatility as much as anybody, but it's not worth losing the money to eliminate. I mean, knowing you're going to get zero, I'd rather have the volatility and know that we receive approximately $1.3 million in excess cost support. I wouldn't want to lose that just to know that we're not getting anything.
You know, one problem with the bill that we saw with the Connecticut partnership that's dealing with education funds is this body is exempted from FOI and from state ethics. So we would basically, if it passed into law, there would be a pot of money that this group would determine how it gets doled out and administered, and there would be no public reporting requirements, and they could do it all, you know, like a private board of directors.
This is the definition of a backroom deal, right?
Absolutely. So it's a little shocking to me that the legislation would even look like this, and I think it's going to meet a lot of opposition.
I was very supportive early on when there was an effort to remove volatility.
Yeah.
I just believe that it's gone in a direction that we can't and shouldn't support.
Any other thoughts, questions? No? Then the last thing I'll just say is I'm sure we will be in continuous conversation over COVID-19 as we move forward. And continue to pay close attention to the guidance from the state and follow that guidance to the best of our ability. But thank you so much for your time. I know you're all very busy.
Well, and can I just say thank you to all of you as somebody who knows how demanding it is to be a Board of Ed member. Thank you for all you do for the community.
Well, thank you. And this is great. I mean, I'm really interested in hearing more about some of the things you mentioned as well, this kind of climate change or Native American studies, this kind of personal finance. These sounds like really interesting things that the legislature is thinking about. So
Yeah.
it was interesting to hear.
Wonderful. Good. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. We are going to go, that was item 3, now down to item 4, and take action on minutes from a number of meetings over the last couple of months. So, January 27th, 2020, a budget forum. Is there a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Are there questions or corrections on those minutes? All right, all in favor? Aye. January 28th, 2020, also this budget forum, the second night of the budget forum. Is there a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved.
Second. Any questions or corrections?
Yes, there was one correction. The 28th actually was a Tuesday and not a Monday.
Correct. Ah, excellent. This is a really very minor correction. Page 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down, the line starts be an effort to, I believe that word is ensure, E-N-S-U-R-E. All right. There's been a motion and a second. 2 corrections. Anything else? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right. On February 3rd, 2020, this is a special meeting, executive session. Is there a motion to approve these minutes? So moved. Second. Any corrections, questions? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right. We okay here? Do we need to halt?
Tech
No,
support.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Ignore the distraction.
February 10th, 2020, a special meeting. Is there a motion to approve these minutes?
So second.
Any questions or corrections? I did have, on page 4, most of the way down, Dr. Balistraci noted that the board will plan to take action on the budget. This is about the maker spaces. And the third line into the paragraph, and specifics on the technology equipment that, I think it should say, would be proposed under the technology lease instead of the $50,000 for maker spaces. I just want to make clear that it's not a $50,000 lease, it is $50,000 of the lease for that item. Any other corrections? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, and then the last, February 10th, 2020, regular meeting. Is there a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Any corrections or questions? Then I'm going to just note one here as well. Page 5, again, under maker spaces, 2/3 of the way down. The last sentence, the board agreed to a $50,000 reduction in the, and I would add, instructional equipment line for maker spaces, because that's the line it came out of. Any other corrections? All right, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, that, we've met a few times over the last few weeks. It is now time for public forum for topics on the board agenda. Is there anyone who would like to address the board at this time? Okay. We have, now go to review and approval of expenditures for the month of February.
Yes, so I reviewed the expenditures for the month of February. The expenditures were $4,666,013.94. Expenditures and encumbrances through the end of February were 61.55% of the budget as compared to 58.55% in 2019. We did receive $999,330 from the excess cost grant. This allocation of the grant was 74.9% of the total amount due. As in previous years, we expect the final allocation in May to be a lower rate. We discussed the expenditures and the warrants in our operations meeting prior to this meeting. Unless there are any further discussions or comments, I motion to approve the expenditures for the month of February.
Second.
Any questions? As Mr. Delventer said, we did discuss this in detail in the Operations Committee. Okay, motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, we have done student representatives, so Dr. Freeman, it is time for the superintendent's report.
Thank you very much. If it pleases the board, I'd like to go a little bit out of order here and invite Dr. Crystal to share the accountability data update at this point. I will apologize that we don't just at this, you know what, let me rescind that. Let me begin, and maybe
Okay.
we'll have a projector up and ready for that portion of the report. Thank you, Julia. So let me start by, again, noting for the board that we are deep into the process of our principal search here at the high school. On Wednesday and Thursday of this week, we will be conducting principal interviews all day long. There is a representative committee that has been seated. That committee is made up of 4 teachers from here at the high school, 2 students, 1 junior, 1 senior, 2 parents, 2 administrators from at-large in the district, as well as 1 Board of Education member, Dr. Balistraci. That committee on Wednesday and Thursday will be meeting 8 candidates who will be joining us from 3 different states, and that will by no means result in a finalist. That is the first step in what we consider to be at least a 3-step process as we move forward in this search, and we will continue to keep you apprised. We hope to have a candidate in front of this board at your April regular meeting for you to meet and interview and hopefully approve. We also want to update you. I know that we spoke with our legislators to a certain degree about COVID-19 and about the impact here in the school system. As was noted, I did participate in a conference phone call earlier this evening with the governor and with the Commissioner of Education, as well as other cabinet officials from the state. Tomorrow, I will be meeting with the emergency management team here in Guilford. And we've been meeting regularly with local and state officials to monitor the spread of the coronavirus. As I have been communicating with the community, at this time, our activities fall into 3 very broad categories. One is around communications, and we continue to work to communicate with the community and particularly with our parent community around national and state information, so we're continuing to keep people apprised onto the development of this situation, but also really reminding the parent community and our student community that the best things that we can be doing, the best positive actions that we can take, continue to be those regular actions around cold and flu season, hygiene, and etiquette. We have posted new information, new posters around all of our schools and in all of our bathrooms, reminding students about the importance of washing their hands and covering their coughs. We are reminding the parents of that regularly. We are ordering and stocking in our classrooms more tissues, more disinfectant wipes, more disinfecting hand gel. At this point, we're beginning to run into availability and delivery concerns, but we have orders in and we are reaching out to friends, and we will continue to distribute those materials to every classroom as much as possible. We are also, and this is enormously important, messaging to the parent community and our staff and employees as well that anybody who feels symptomatic, and specifically if you have a fever, should be staying home from the schools. School nurses are on top of that. Classroom teachers are paying attention to that. But if students are unwell and if students have a fever, they certainly should not be in school. And we are reminding all of our employees and volunteers that if they have a fever, they should not be in schools. So that first piece is all around communication. The second piece is that we are very much taking our custodial responsibilities seriously at the schools. So again, we are ordering and working hard to keep all of our classrooms, lavatories, and cafeteria areas stocked. In fact, we are, because we couldn't order them, we are building freestanding Purell dispensers that we are distributing in every cafeteria and in every entrance way to all of our 7 schools, so that particularly in a school like here at the high school where the commons is so large, we have Purell dispensers around the perimeter, but we will be placing freestanding dispensers down the center aisle of the cafeteria as well, and placing them in the opening to every school, and Mr. Diaz is doing a great job building those for us since we couldn't order and get those delivered. We are extending custodial hours. Just as recently as earlier today, we made the decision to put extra custodians on in the evenings in all 7 of our schools. We are going to staff an additional position at every one of the other 6 schools and 2 additional positions here at the high school. And we are deferring any other custodial work at this time and focusing only on the direct cleaning of the spaces that our students inhabit. Classrooms, lavatories, countertops in the offices, so that we're focused on the immediate cleaning that will help to reduce the spread of the virus. So we're focusing on those surfaces which students touch. To that end, we have ordered additional custodial devices that will allow us to more efficiently, effectively spray the disinfectant into the classrooms every evening, again focusing on desktops and doorknobs, those surfaces that students come into direct contact with. At this time, we are continuing to meet all of the green cleaning expectations that are detailed on our website. So while we're talking about this deep cleaning, I also want parents in the community to know that we're continuing to use only those cleaners that are approved under the green cleaning plan. There are requests going to the State Department of Education for waivers, and if the state or our local health authorities feel that we should be more aggressively disinfecting, and if we pursue a waiver to go beyond what's currently allowed under the green cleaning regimen, we will of course be notifying parents before we make any of those changes in the cleaning regimen. But we're working as hard as we can to make sure that the schools are not places where we're continuing to spread the virus. Finally, the third area that we're messaging in, that we're working on, is trying to make sure that we're speaking clearly about the possibility of a prolonged school closing. In that conference call earlier today, the governor and the commissioner both made clear that at this time, a school closing, a prolonged school closing, will remain a local decision. It was also made clear that there is an expectation that any days missed will be made up either with existing vacation time or summertime that is left in our schedule. So while we have been asking our staff members to prepare, and while we have been asking parents to be ready for the possibility of electronic work coming home and electronic instruction taking place during this possible closing, it looks very likely now that any such request would be work that we're sending home voluntarily for students to engage in a way for parents to help keep students engaged in school and in school work, but it wouldn't necessarily be relieving us of the responsibility to make those days up at some point later in the school year. And again, as our legislators said, and as we discussed in the operations meeting, all of that is what we know at this moment in time. Advice from the state and circumstances around this is quickly developing, and so we don't know if this will change tomorrow or a week from now, but currently that is the advice that we're receiving. That is the way that we're working to push information out of the district, and those are the three areas on which we're focusing. And it might make sense to pause for questions there if the board has any
Absolutely.
before moving on to our next topic.
Absolutely. Questions, anybody?
Paul, can you talk a little bit about what we're doing for Green Clean? Do we know that that's effective against the coronavirus?
So the state has a number of restrictions both in and outside the buildings on the applications and the chemicals essentially that we can use. So the way that we can keep grass areas and plantings and fields outside allows us to use a very limited number of pesticides, and in the building we tend to use cleaning solutions that are effective but are also not necessarily going to exacerbate allergies or particularly affect students with asthma. We don't use bleach to disinfect. There is some concern that if the level of concern or the spread rises, that we would have to go beyond the effectiveness of the current green cleaning regimen and begin using bleach dilutions or similar dilutions, what I'm hearing described as hospital level disinfecting. So we're just going to continue to monitor. Right now, we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can and hitting all those surfaces with the cleaning solutions and products that we have available to us. It should be effective if we're hitting all of those surfaces every night. And again, the idea of these sprayers, which in one communication I referred to as foggers, the idea of the sprayers is it would give us a way to more effectively hit all of the surfaces in a classroom area in a way that would allow the product to stay on those surfaces overnight, therefore being much more effective than if we were by hand spraying and wiping, which isn't going to get the 100% coverage and contact that the sprayer allows us. So it's similar solutions, but it's a more effective way of delivering those solutions. That was a long-winded answer to say they're safe cleaning products. If
I just want to know if
necessary.
is it killing corona?
Well, we're being told, right now, there's no specific information on corona specifically. What we're using is effective against standard cold and flu viruses, so we're assuming it will be effective.
Great.
And again, if we decide to move to a more aggressive a more aggressive protocol, we will of course let parents know before making that shift.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right.
So then I am going to hand it off to Dr. Crystal, and I'm still going to say that we apologize. We don't have projection of these slides available, but board members do have these slides available to you in your, in your packets.
The very last thing in your packet, these are the full slide presentation.
Thank you.
So these are the last year's accountability results based on the Smarter Balance, the Next Generation Science, and those exams and the SAT as well are in here that were given in the spring of last year. So the first slide you can see talks about the purposes for doing this accountability system. And the ones that are worthwhile to me, they're all worthwhile, but the ones that are especially notable for me are helping the school and the district make improvements, showing where support is needed most, and recognizing our successes. So this is data that happened in the spring. It's not current ongoing data, and it's a snapshot. The performance index is a snapshot in time. There is growth data that does show trends over the course of time, and we'll look at that. So if you look at slide 4, you can see the 12 indicators that we are rated on. The ones with the little H's next to them, we receive data for both high-needs students and regular education students. So those are all 12 of the factors that go into the accountability index. And if you look at slide 5, you will see the actual accountability data for the district. This is the district as a whole. Our accountability index is 84.4. You can see that under the percentage points earned column, which is right next to the state column. And that index indicates the percentage of total possible points earned on all 12 indicators together. If you look at the next slide, slide 6, you can look at the trend of this data over the last 4 years. And you can look at places where the green boxes show that we've remained at 100%. And you can see some red arrows, which show some going down a little bit, and then some green arrows going up. So we are in the process of having conversations with all the administrators of the buildings to talk about our data and look at what are some of the things that we can do to address any of the areas in which we've dropped a little bit. If you look, sure.
Excuse me. All right, so is there some place where if we are at 84.4 for the most recent one, this slide that shows 15, 16 through 18, 19 doesn't have the comparable number in it.
Last year, we were at 84.4. I don't know if we have the last 4 years for you anywhere in this packet, but we were flat from last year.
Flat from last year.
I'd have to look back to, I can't do 15, 16, or 16, 17 off the top of my head.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I don't think we have that number in the packet, but we
No,
can get that for you.
get it for you.
Okay.
One of the things they also look at the state is the gap. And if you look at slide 7, it explains what that means. If there is a gap, the school is identified as having a gap if the gap is substantially different between the average statewide gap in any subject area. So that means between high needs and non-high needs students. That's the gap that they're just talking about there. And they do the same for graduation. They look at the graduation gap between, the graduation rate between high needs and non-high needs students, and then they compare that to the gap at the state level. And if your gap is larger than the state level, then the school or the district is considered to have a gap. So on slide 8, you can see the gap data for the district. And at the district level, we do not have a gap. You can see the state gap and our gap. And we are not an outlier as far as the state level goes. If you look at slide 9, that is a breakdown by school. And this year, there is a gap at the high school. The other schools do not have a gap, but there is one at the high school. Slide 10 shows our accountability index relative to the other districts in Durg B. And if you look at Guilford in yellow, there is probably just a little over a point difference between Guilford and Simsbury. So the numbers there are pretty close together. And the one thing that we're very proud of on slide 11 is if you look at, this is a list of the districts that are measured based on the same total number of points. And if you look at where we fall and you look at our participation rate for high needs and non-high needs, we are the only district with 100% participation rate, which means we include all of our students in testing, state testing.
Which I think is a really important point to make. If you think back last year to these two slides, when you looked at the Durg performance last year, I believe we were second or third. And when you looked at this slide, which shows districts from all over the state, I do know that we were fourth. So this year, we're 10th on this slide. Now, we went from 84.4 last year to 84.4 this year. What happened is that there were some other districts that were just below us last year that have edged up to just around us. And I believe there's less than a point difference between Guilford and Old Saybrook, which is in number 6 on this slide. When you then look at our participation rate for both our complete population and our overall population and our high needs population, which are both 100%, and then you look at some districts that have less than a % difference in the overall score for us, but look at those participation rates, I think that you're beginning to see that statistically there's very tight grouping that's going on in these top 10 districts that you see performing here. So this can be portrayed as slipping, but I'm very pleased with the performance. And in fact, the next slide, slide number 12, becomes one of my favorite slides as we look at these data this year.
I'm so sorry, so I just want to understand what this 100% represents. This is on measure accountability indicators. This is on testing, or is this on other, I mean, right, so we know that, as one of your slides lists so well, we know what the 12 indicators are, and some of them don't require a student for us to report them. A student feedback or participation, right?
This is
So-
essentially participation in 3 through 8 Smarter Balanced Assessment.
Okay,
Does it
okay.
And NGSS. So
Science.
it doesn't necessarily include the Connecticut CMT Day participation rate, but it does include the 3 through 8 participation in the science assessment, the reading and writing assessment, and the math assessments. Every single student participated.
So if I may, just follow up then, when we see an achievement gap, is achievement gap partially measured by these indicators which some of these schools are missing?
Ask that again. I'm
Sorry. So on slide 9, in the Guilford Schools report, we do know, we notice that there's an achievement gap. I assume that's between non-high need students and high need students at the high school identified this year. And my question is, if I go to slide 11 and note that other schools do not have 100% participation rate, is that achievement
That does
gap,
affect-
right?
Yes, it is affected by participation rate, because it is distinction between high needs and non-high needs
Right.
students.
Okay.
Counting everybody, they're not.
What?
Yes.
We're counting
No, I
everybody.
understand,
Yeah.
right,
You can
that's,
ma-
I'm just.
Yeah.
You can make
making
the
that
argument that our
clear
data
and
are
overt.
more accurate than
And are
anybody who has
counting-
less than 100%
And are
participation.
counting everybody. Again,
And
I
there's-
am,
there's
I'm
certainly
not saying,
statistical sampling that can go into that, but we're very proud that every child participated.
right, and I am not trying to devalue the importance of us, and I can't imagine you are either of of paying attention to things like, oh, there's an achievement gap, what can we do about it? But it's just important to understand all the statistics.
And it's always important, as we do every year, to put this kind of measure into context, right? And
Right.
I want to be very cautious that we don't spend too much time looking at this and considering it a ranking.
Right.
That we
Right.
look at
No,
it
that's
and
important.
consider it data, to Dr. Crystal's point, that we will use in exactly those ways, Dr. Balistraci. How did we do in the past? How are we doing this year? And what does it mean as a system and as a school system for us to continually support more students and do better
Right.
moving forward without worrying about
Right.
how the Joneses did this year. Again, right, when I look at this and look at the cluster, between an 84.4 and an 85.5 ranks 5 through 10. And when you're that tightly clustered, and when you look at participation rates and ask what that means to less than a % difference, I just want to make sure that the community knows I am absolutely as proud of these 2 slides this year as I was of the 2 slides that we shared last year.
Just so that everybody in the community can understand this, I mean, if a district was trying to game this process, what students would you not have participate?
Well, I mean, I don't want to suggest that anybody is gaming the system, but I'm very proud of the fact that all of our students and all of our high-need students participated in this assessment. So if we identify that we have a gap between the performance of that high-needs cohort and the total population of our schools, we can feel confident knowing that all of our high-needs students were represented in that sampling, and therefore we've got really valuable data. I wouldn't want to suggest that there are districts that are encouraging low participation rates, or particularly low participation rates among the high-need students, because it helps in performance. I just wanted to highlight our 100% participation.
Okay.
So if you move on to slide 12.
Thank you.
This is a really interesting scatter plot that Dr. Freeman introduced to us, and it shows per pupil expenditure and relative to the accountability index score. So we are right on the intersection of the X and Y axis there. So you can look in the quadrants and see at the bottom, below the X axis, those are all people that spend less, districts that spend less than we do, and above the line districts that, I'm
Yeah, actually, that's
saying it
flip-flop,
wrong.
yep. To the right of the vertical line are districts that outspend us.
Outspend us.
And north of the horizontal line, I know that's not really north, but above the horizontal line are districts that outperform us, which makes the upper left quadrant the return on investment quadrant to look at. Right? If there was anybody who was getting a better return on their investment, they would be identified in that upper left quadrant. And I'd go so far as to argue that the few dots that appear there are statistically insignificant. Now, I will tell you, we know who they are, and we will follow up on why they were able to perform equal to us, but it looks like they've expended a little bit less per student, or how they were able to perform even slightly better than us at a similar per student investment. We're also looking to the districts that are in the upper right quadrant. Just because you're spending more money doesn't mean that you're not doing things that we can learn from. So, what's also interesting is that the yellow dot, we changed the coding on this one. The yellow and red dots are districts that are in DIRG B. And so the yellow and red dots are the ones who are in socioeconomically similar communities, and those are really the ones that we want to focus on.
So who are those 2 red dots?
I believe that might be Cheshire and Brookfield.
Brookfield is the dot to the left. That's most to the red one, that's most to the left. And the other orange-colored one that's right near us is Avon.
I
There you
will
go.
note that per 2018 data,
We're right in the center of the
right
X.
in there,
We set in the intersection.
per 2018 data, Guilford is 83rd in the state in per pupil spending. So we are getting quite a magnificent return on investment.
So again, if you wanted to
All
use
that.
those two numbers, we're 83rd in the state on spending, but we're 10th in the state on performance. And I would argue that those 10 are really finely separated to make 10 individual spots on that line. If you clustered those by percent or even 0.5% performance, think about how tight those top lines would be. And as we're learning this year, while this data becomes very important, it's also really important to say that those 12 indicators are not the only ways to measure school performance. There may not be the most accurate ways to measure school performance. They're the 12 that the state has currently identified. You talk about student satisfaction, you talk about parent satisfaction, you talk about quality of experience, you talk about social emotional wellness. All of those are hard to tease out in these factors. So we appreciate these numbers, but we want to be very careful about suggesting that this is the only or even the most important measure. It's a measure, and it's always important to share.
The last section of this report are SAT scores. So if you look at slide 13, you can see the percentage of students at level 3 or 4 who met or exceeded level 3. And you can see our average score, 577 for ELA, 576 for math. And if you look at the bottom half of that slide, you can see the trend data from 2015-16 to 18-19.
And again, visually, both the ELA and math scores compared to the other DIRG B school districts. Got an SAT scatter plot that looks really good, too.
Next time.
And again, we just always want to caution about when we have conversations like this one. Through the budget process this last week with the Board of Finance, we talked quite a bit about these comparables. They are important, and we take them seriously, and we learn from them, but we don't want to for a minute suggest that this is the only way or the best way to measure the value of a school system. It's one way to look at the value of a school system.
Fair enough.
Excellent. Thank you.
And I think that completes our report for this evening.
All right, on to the board agenda. 9.1, to act on personnel items. So we are asked to ratify the resignation for the purpose of retirement of the following teachers: Janine Farrell, Jones Cox Elementary School, grade 1, 19 years of service in Guilford, and Ann Hartford, Cox Elementary School, grade 3, 15 years of service in Guilford, both effective June 30th, 2020. Is there a motion to ratify the resignation of these two teachers?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And certainly a thank you to them for
Yes.
a number of years of service to our community. We are also asked to ratify the appointment of the following teacher: Susanna Dameron, high school, Adams N. Baldwin, a social worker. Is there a motion to ratify the appointment of this teacher?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Excellent. All right. 9.2, to act on healthy food certification. So this is submitted to us by Erica Biggiotti, who's our Director of Dining Services, and Jason Bowden. Jason, do you want to spend a second just telling us a little bit, right? This is healthy food certification. This allows us, if we follow certain state nutritional standards and healthy food standards in our school system, this allows us a reimbursable rate that brings in about $20,000 to the district. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. So this is, we are being asked to vote on two things here. Voting for the healthy food option. Here is the motion language. We are going to provide this text for the minutes. pursuant to CGS Section 10-15, the Board of Education or governing authority certifies that all food items offered for sale to students in the schools under its jurisdiction and not exempted from the Connecticut Nutrition Standards published by the Connecticut State, page 3 of 6, Connecticut State Department of Education,
Sorry.
will comply with the Connecticut Nutrition Standards during the period of July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2021. This certification shall include all food offered for sale to students separately from reimbursable meals at all times and from all sources, including but not limited to school stores, vending machines, school cafeterias, culinary programs, and any fundraising activities on school premises sponsored by the school or non-school organizations and groups. And I believe we want to vote on that motion first and then vote on the second motion. Is that correct?
Yes, and I would just add that this is an annual renewal. This is a program in which we are already participating and have participated for a number of years. This is just a required annual renewal by the Board of Education. It changes nothing in our current practice.
So can I ask someone to provide a motion for the language that I just read?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Thank you.
There is a second piece to this, which I will also read. This is a motion for language for combined food and beverage exemptions as a follow-up to the first motion. The Board of Education or governing authority will allow the sale to students of food items that do not meet the Connecticut Nutrition Standards and beverages not listed in Section 10-221Q of the Connecticut General Statutes, provided that the following conditions are met. Number 1, the sale is in connection with an event occurring after the end of the regular school day or on the weekend. Number 2, the sale is at the location of the event. And Number 3, the food and beverage items are not sold from a vending machine or school store. An event is an occurrence that involves more than just a regularly scheduled practice, meeting, or extracurricular activity. For example, soccer games, school plays, and interscholastic debates are events, but soccer practices, play rehearsals, and debate team meetings are not. The regular school day is the period from midnight before to 30 minutes after the end of the official school day. Location means where the event is being held. So I am asking someone to make a motion that those exact words be reflected in our approval of this program.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right,
Thank you
thank
for
you. Okay, number 3.
Bit of good news.
Yes. This is a request for the Board of Education to approve a donation in the amount of $13,425 from the Melissa Jones PTO for new equipment for the playground. Is there a motion to approve
moved.
this donation?
Second.
And I will note that we talked about this a little bit in the Operations Committee. Got to see a picture of the equipment. It was noted that this is a piece of equipment that is particularly accessible to students with disabilities, which is certainly an important bonus for us. And we certainly appreciate the work of the PTO to create this opportunity for students at Melissa Jones.
And has been approved by our Facilities Department as meeting all code requirements for playgrounds.
Terrific. So I've heard a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. All right. 9.4, to approve a $2,000 donation from Guilford Youth Football and Cheerleading for the purchase of new jerseys for the football team. Is there a motion to approve this donation?
So moved. Second.
Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. All right. Lots of great donations tonight. This is terrific. 9.5, to approve $6,414 donation from the Netminders Booster Club to pay the salaries for 2 assistant boys lacrosse coaches. Is there a motion to approve this donation?
So moved.
And again, I'll note, we've noted this many times over the years, the booster clubs are really so supportive of our students and our team sports in this case. So I've heard a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Excellent. All right, 9.6, receive recommendations from the policy committee. I note that Moira's unable to be with us tonight. Is there someone from the policy committee that can present these receive items to us?
I can update.
I'm sorry?
I can update it.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Roden.
The first policy in front of you is 5134, which relates to non-resident students. This is just a receive item tonight. It does not include the regulations that go along with this policy, because those are going to be updated and presented at a later point in time in the year. There are several minor changes that are being made to this policy for you to review over the next couple of weeks. If I may point out that the last time this policy was revised was about 13 years ago, so it has been a while. And one of which I'd like to point out is the change to the policy related to the dwelling in a property and how that impacts where a student may choose to go to school or go to school based on the fact that the property line intersects the dwelling. Dr. Freeman deals with this on occasion in his office because of building permits, because of the town lines, and we are seeking here that if there is a situation in which the property line intersects a household, that the side of the house that has the most part of the house in a particular town will be the place that the student will be going to school. If you move down the policy, you'll notice something that was missing, and I need to update this for you tomorrow. It's my mistake. On the non-resident attendance without tuition, number 2, we in the policy committee just added a sentence at the end that I would include that brings back the rental or the lease agreements into the policy, but there's a restriction in terms of timing, so I'll make sure Terry has that update for you tomorrow.
Okay.
The rest of the revisions just pertain to recommendations being made by the superintendent or her designee. And you'll see on page 9.6.1 that there's some repetitiveness in terms of what's put into the policy to provide some continuity. This is only a receive item tonight.
Excellent. So if board members have questions about this, they can contact you or Moira Grader?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
The second item is 5222, which pertains to student records and confidentiality. We are looking in this policy to bring it up to date with our current practice regarding the dissemination of student transcripts. We have not updated this policy in quite some time, and we're fast approaching the time in which transcripts are being requested by our juniors applying for colleges and universities, as well as graduates of the Guilford public school system that come back over the course of the summer to ask for transcripts for work purposes or graduate studies. The only change that we're recommending at this time is located towards the end of the document, and it is not, it's actually on, if you work from the back, it's 3 pages from the back as it relates to fee for reproducing records. You notice that there are 3 lines that are crossed out. As we spoke in the policy committee, one of the practices that we have already researched and we hope to have provide our parents and our students is a online paying mechanism by which to get transcripts. And by deleting those 3 lines in there, we'll be able to implement that process.
Okay,
That in no way affects current students or their availability for transcripts. It does not
transcripts.
affect
Correct.
college applications in any way.
I'm also, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm also noting, is there a change on the next
I
page?
missed that one.
It looks extremely minor. Under retention and destruction of student records?
Yeah, yours isn't red.
Oh, that's because my printer, my printer color didn't.
Right, there was an amendment to.
Yes. Oh, okay.
It's
the
just
dates.
updating the reference.
Great, terrific, that's what I thought. All right, sorry. When you print in all black ink, it's a little harder to see. My bad.
Mrs. Fandella in Dr. Freeman's office is requesting that the board entertain waiving the 30-day period for these 3 changes in this document so that they can begin implementing this as quickly as they can.
So normally we would receive this tonight and vote on it next month, and what you're asking us to do is, are we comfortable also voting on accepting these changes this evening?
That is correct.
Which would
Okay.
require 2 motions, one to waive your regular
Right.
policy of a 30-day waiting period, and then a second to approve what we have in front of you.
I will
Okay,
motion that we waive our policy of waiting 30 days.
Second.
all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right. And then can I have a motion to accept the changes made, proposed changes made to this policy?
So moved. Second.
Any questions? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right,
Thank you.
there you
Just
go.
one quick clarification on that. That was just 522,
Correct.
5222.
Correct.
Okay.
That's
Yes,
correct.
that is
Yes.
not the non-resident student policy.
Right.
It is only the student records and confidentiality policy.
So, right, the excellent clarification. So that policy 5134 will be something we vote on next month. And we'll have the intervening month to ask questions, if we have them, or voice concerns. Okay, so we are now up to 9.7. This was something we voted to add to the agenda for this meeting, a vote on a $50,000 reduction to the budget. Dr. Freeman and I, last Tuesday night, attended the Board of Finance meeting at which we presented the Board of Ed's proposed Board of Education budget to the Board of Finance. The town Board of Selectmen also presented their budget to the Board of Finance. We answered some questions. There were not a lot of questions, but we answered some questions around tuition. We talked a little bit about enrollment, and noting that, as we've certainly discussed here, that this year, I think we're seeing the impact of a reduction in enrollment in a way that we have not seen in past years. Certainly, we have been lucky, and we noted the trajectory of our enrollment decrease for the Board of Finance, which has been very different than some of our neighboring districts. In any case, we answered some of their questions. The Board of Finance then met again Thursday night, March 5th. Dr. Freeman and I were there again to answer additional questions, some of them again around tuition, some questions around the literacy coaches. I'm trying to think what else.
Around special education
education.
Programming over the last several years.
I was asked again to speak a little bit about our decision around the artist in residence and maker spaces and our thoughts about that moving forward. And then the Board of Finance deliberated. I will note that we were commended a number of times for bringing forth a really responsible, thoughtful, tight budget. In the end, the Board of Finance determined they wanted to help the taxpayers out just a little bit more and chose to reduce overall the town and Board of Education budget by $100,000 and made the determination to do that in an even split, so that our budget was reduced by $50,000, which brings our present budget now to have an increase of $1,177,628, which represents a 1.94% increase over last year's budget. The Board of Finance can make that reduction. They cannot tell us how to make it or in what line item to make it, so it is now our decision to make. We need to, again, take $50,000 off the budget that we presented to them last week. I will note, and I'm going to turn to our administration to offer some explanation, but we have been provided with a proposal for where those funds could come. In this case, we have liability, auto, and property insurance that can be reduced by $11,000. We have workers' comp insurance that could be reduced by $34,000, which sums to $45,000. And there is then a proposal for the additional $5,000 to come out of the tuition line. I remind the viewing public that this board, in making our final deliberations on the budget brought to us by Dr. Freeman, added $150,000 to that tuition line. This would take only $5,000 out of that line.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share our rationale behind those recommendations. As the board knows, we prepare our budget incredibly early in the budget year. We start working in September on next year's school budget. You know that when we brought our first draft of the budget to you, we were making our best predictions on our pension contribution, and it was after we presented our budget to you that we received the recommendations from the pension committee, and we needed to make an adjustment before you finalized your budget. In a similar fashion, we have received updated projections from our insurance providers, and we overestimated the amount of money that would be necessary in both of these insurance accounts. We've had better experience, and we're going to experience less of a need to increase in budget and increase in our workers' compensation to a significant figure of $34,000. We also can reduce that liability, auto, and property insurance by $11,000. So by making that adjustment, as our advice is telling us, we pick up $45,000 of that reduction. Again, we've added monies to the tuition line. We think that making a reduction of $5,000 there is prudent. And again, just to remind this board, all of these budget items are projections. We've worked really hard to keep all of them down, but you know that you will face transfers from line to line. We know that in past years we've had to come and ask for unbudgeted kindergarten sections in July or August. We just got our first kindergarten enrollment figures today. We will monitor those enrollments. We'll be back to you, but we think that this adjustment is reasonable. And I just want to express, I really do appreciate the support of the Board of Finance. They listened, they understood the budget proposal that we brought forward, and this adjustment is minor and understood on our side, and we appreciate them moving the budget forward essentially intact. I really do appreciate that level of support
Absolutely.
from the Board of Finance and the time that they put into understanding what we invest in and what we're accomplishing here in the schools.
I would also like to note, as I did, there were not a lot of questions, but because of the time that this board spends with the
Right.
Board of Finance in a number of meetings throughout this budget process, this is a Board of Finance that is really well-versed in the way we think about and have to understand tuition, for instance, the volatility of that line. A number of other questions that come to us from the Board of Finance come from a really knowledgeable and thoughtful space. So again, that approach, that kind of collaborative approach to understanding the budget as we go through the process. The questions that the Board of Finance asked the Board of Education during those meetings to really clarify an understanding really allows then for the kind of thoughtful questions that they asked and explanations that we were able to provide.
And they move our budget request forward unchanged. They really do understand the importance of investing in the physical plants as well.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
So
I move the acceptance.
you would like to, so you would like to move
The
for,
changes recommended by the administration.
okay, which is again $11,000 from the LAP insurance line, 34,000 from workers' comp, and 5,000 from the tuition line. So Dr. Hirsch has made that motion. Is there a second to that motion? Discussion. Is there discussion that folks want to have about that before we put that to a vote? Hearing,
Well,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I'm of two minds on this one. Obviously, we can move things around from category to category. I would be more comfortable taking the $5,000 out of the medical account as opposed to out of the tuition account, but $5,000 in either one of those accounts is kind of a minor amount of money, so.
Based on the report we heard earlier in operations, I wouldn't be opposed to moving 5,000 to medical either.
Yeah, I mean, we had a very favorable report from our consultant in the operations committee, and I would suggest that we amend the motion to move it from the tuition to the medical account.
As a friendly amendment, if Dr. Hirsch accepts that, you could.
I was just going to say, I need a little help with my Robert's Rules of Order.
The move.
The amendment, you are accepting the amendment to your motion.
Needs to be
It
reseconded.
needs to be reseconded.
Second.
And now you vote on it with 5,000 coming from medical rather than tuition, correct?
Okay.
Robert's rules.
Is there, thank you. I was kind of sure about how we're going to go about that, but are there more conversation regarding that amendment or other approaches here?
Scanziano's just making
All right,
hand over fist
so
in his
again,
budget.
we have a motion and a second for $11,000 from the LAP insurance, $34,000 from the workers' comp, and $5,000 from the medical line. All in favor?
Aye.
Objections? Abstain. All right.
That's
we
about
have
2 months
made
of
that.
work. Thank you again for all the time and
That
effort
is-
that goes into that.
That is true. All right. We are now number 10 of our agenda, reports of committees. 10.1 Policy Committee.
If I may, Moira and I spoke about a brief conversation we wanted to have here, and I'd be happy to share it in her absence.
Okay, wonderful.
So in front of you, you currently have received revisions to the non-resident student policy, and the revisions that you have that we'd like you to act on next month are essentially small and logistical in nature. However, we did have a conversation at the policy committee about two larger conversations that would fall underneath this policy. One would be the consideration of allowing tuitioned attendance for the non-resident children of employees of the Guilford school system. That is something that came up in negotiations with two groups, both the teacher group and the administrative group. And the negotiation teams felt uncomfortable agreeing to that in the negotiations setting, which is by needs confidential and not in the public eye, and suggested that it was a conversation that should happen through policy, which would make it something that did, by definition, happen in front of and with the public. So we did have a conversation about maybe bringing that as an agenda item to the full board, having a conversation here at the full board about possibilities and ways that that could look, and then sending back to the policy committee the charge of finalizing that in language that then comes back for the board. Right? Even the policy committee, while it's technically public, it doesn't draw a large audience and it is not televised. And so we felt that if the full board agreed, Dr. Balistraci and I could schedule that as a regular agenda item, and we could speak to some policy examples, and we could certainly have the opportunity for members of the employee groups to voice their interest in that topic. Along the same lines, Mr. Bowden and I have met recently with representatives from ACES, and we have begun to look into the opportunity for Guilford to participate in the Open Choice program at the state level. The Open Choice program in the state of Connecticut allows for more suburban communities that have capacity in their schools to offer seats to students who reside in different communities that may not have the same educational opportunities. So for instance, if we were to participate in this particular open choice cooperative through ACES, we would be offering seats in Guilford schools to students who currently reside in New Haven. They are not tuition seats. We would be doing it collaboratively. The state picks up the cost for transportation. The state also would be reimbursing Guilford $3,000 for each of the students who participated. Guilford identifies the number of seats in what schools, at what grade levels, and then enters into this agreement. We are not thinking about entering into this agreement for this coming school year, for September of 20. We're thinking about the idea of, we want to talk about the opportunity of entering into this agreement for a school year that would begin in September of 21. But again, at the policy committee, because of the nature of this conversation, we thought that perhaps Dr. Balistrasi and I could schedule that as an agenda item. The representatives from ACES who run this program, and we thought Superintendent Hamlet Hernandez from Branford, who has been intimately involved with the Choice program for more than a decade, I think since his time in Hamden, and Branford participates to a significant degree currently. We thought we could invite Hamlet to come and talk about Branford's experience with Choice as well. We did not mark any of these up as part of the policy in front of you tonight because we believe that these are conversations that need some discussion before the policy committee makes specific marked up recommendations, and then we'll land back with the policy committee after we've had some public conversation about them to see whether we move those forward or not. We wanted to begin what would be a lengthy conversation on both of those topics, even though they both fall into that non-resident student policy. And there's no connection between the two. The board might choose to move forward with one and not the other, with both, with neither. They just both happen to impact the enrollment of non-Guilford residents in our schools. Makes sense to talk about them together because they're going to have an interconnectivity between the two.
Dr. Freeman, just to add one more point. It's our understanding that prior to our arrival in district, Guilford was part of an open choice program.
But so long ago, at least 15 to 16 years ago, Guilford may have participated in open choice to a limited degree, back when Learn was one of the brokers. And so this would be an opportunity to begin, and it fits into some other broader conversations that have been happening in the community about the diversity of our community and our schools. So it's an opportunity, I think, to have a conversation. We don't know what the ultimate decision would be, where we might land. We're not even sure what our ultimate recommendation to you would be, but we thought it would be a valuable conversation to have. And then the conversation about non-resident children of employees, that is a conversation that we agreed to have, and so we do need to move forward and begin discussing that opportunity.
Terrific. Any questions?
I think it makes perfect sense.
Dr. Balistrasi and I will
Yeah,
look to schedule that in an upcoming meeting then.
That's great. Okay. Any report from the Operations Committee? We did just meet earlier
Right.
this evening.
Well, just briefly, we had a very detailed report by Dennis Johnson, who is the health officer for the town, on this coronavirus problem that the state is facing, and that was very helpful. This is a very quick-moving policy, and it's not clear how things are going to settle out, but we did learn quite a bit there. And we also had a very helpful report by our health insurance consultants, and we got some very good news. The claims this year have been very favorable relative to the forecast, and so we're feeling good about the numbers for the year. Obviously, the coronavirus could affect that account fairly substantially if this epidemic really gets bad, but so far we're in good shape. Those were important reports.
Excellent. All right, thank you. Curriculum Instruction and Assessment Committee.
We did not meet last month. We're meeting this month.
Okay.
At the end of the month, March 23rd. We are going to talk about world languages, which I think is a good topic. Some questions about that topic were brought up by the public in our budget forum meetings. So I look forward to talking about that. And we're also going to be talking about personal or professional development as well. So that's the end of the month.
Okay, terrific. Liaisons to town committees. Any reports?
No updates on mine acquisition.
No? Any others? Okay. Liaison to Learn Board of Directors.
We did have a LEARN meeting. LEARN is, again, the regional education community that stretches from Guilford all the way basically to Rhode Island. So it's here down to that end of the state. And we had the last meeting at their Ocean Avenue location, which was fantastic. It's a magnet school, and it's for kids that, the way that they've kind of described it, it's typically kids that are pretty severely on the spectrum plus something else. So some sort of physical handicap. So basically, that school has one-on-one student to para or teacher supervision. And everything in the school is geared toward helping the kids figure out which way to go. Like the floors are color coded and everything is sensorial. It was awesome. It was such a great place. I was really happy to go there. The saddest thing that they had to report is that they're closing their dual language school, which is affecting about 100 kids in the state. Positively, they had asked us as the board to approve improvements to the second floor of their current Ocean Avenue building, which will allow them to increase by basically double in size the number of kids that they can service. So right now, that Ocean Ave school has about 62 students, and they're hoping to go up to about 100 students once that is done, and it'll take about 2 years to get the build-out of that building finished so they can increase capacity. On a personal note, I work with some of the boys that attend that school, and I got to see them, and it was so cute to see them in their home environment and how well they were flourishing. So I was really happy to see them in their home district. It was great.
Is the, if I may ask a question, is the reduction a budget reduction? Is that a?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're kind of consolidating a number of the schools. I guess they've already made a couple of consolidations, and now they're focusing on, they'll have, I think, just 2 major magnet schools left, including the build-out at Ocean Ave,
Okay.
which is in New London.
Excellent. Thank you. Terrific. Okay, we are now up to public questions. Is there anyone in the public who'd like to address us? Go ahead. Come on up. Ask if you would to state your name and address for the.
Okay. Polly Reeder. I live on Moose Hill Road. Actually, I wanted to start to talk about start time tonight, just to revisit that a little bit, have some transparency around where the district actually sits with it, if there's going to be any kind of movement at any point. So I guess just to start off, my first question, and maybe just a good point to start, is what proportion of the high school students do we feel, do we know based on like the GPS bus data are actually achieving the goal that we had hoped they would in terms of the gain on time?
So we, I don't know that we have that data. So we know that we changed the school start time at the high school by 15 minutes. We know that a good portion of our juniors and seniors drive or ride to school. So they are certainly seeing that change. We know that
Yeah, so we knew.
I don't know beyond that.
We knew going in that anybody who drove to school would benefit from the full 15-minute change, and that's
Right.
approximately 40%. It's between 40 and 60% of our student body achieved the full 15 minutes.
Right.
We then were hoping to gain bus efficiencies that would change the 15 minutes into 25 minutes for students who rode the buses. We achieved that for nobody. If you remember 2 years ago when we made the change, the opening of schools were very difficult. We were
Right.
running into challenges with making the middle school and elementary runs off the heels of that. And so we gave back that 10 minutes additional. I do believe that the majority of students who ride the buses are recognizing the full 15-minute benefit as well.
Great.
Because it happens at the beginning of the school day.
Right.
Due to some variability among individual bus routes, it can't be 100% of the students. So if you were on a bus route that was really small as a freshman, and then when you move to sophomore year, there's a number of students in your neighborhood or between your neighborhood and the school that were 8th graders who are now freshmen, your route may have actually gotten longer, and so you may not have recognized the full 15 minutes. But I would say the majority of the students who rode the bus recognized the 15-minute increase as well as the drivers. No students recognized a 25-minute improvement. We did have that for the first 2 months of school for high school students.
Right.
For bus riders, for a significant portion, I believe it was about 60%. We needed to give those gains away in order to correct the cascade problems that we created at the
Right,
middle and
right,
elementary schools.
Right. And I will say, just, every year, bus routes have to be tweaked for changes in ridership at every level. Kindergarten students coming in, seniors in high school leaving, and then changes within schools. So any particular child's bus time, pickup time can change from year to year because of those changes.
It can
Okay.
essentially be described as a 15-minute gain for most students at the high school that had a corresponding 10-minute delay for the start of the day at the middle schools and a corresponding delay of 5 minutes at the elementary schools.
Okay.
Thank you. And so I just wanted to, and I attended at least a couple of the Start Time Task Force meetings even, and so I know this gets, highly involved and is a very complex topic. And in the community, I think there are those of us who wonder this, wonder that, and have some assumptions in some cases. So just to be clear, why is it that we could not just swap elementary with high school, as some other schools have, districts have done?
I will give at least two answers to that. One is that when we broached the subject of potential approaches to the school start time at a public forum, which was extremely well-attended at Adams Middle School Chorus Room, there was really mixed response from the community about that option. So there was in no way a sense for this board, or those of us who were on the board at that time, there was no sense that that was going to be a preferred approach that we take as a Board of Education. Had it been a message we heard loud and clear from the community, we could have then started to think about what that might look like and all the challenges that might ensue from that. But it was not something we pursued with any degree of detail because it became quite clear that that was not the preferred approach from the community.
It was also something that the task force itself moved away from fairly early on because while that addresses the start time for the high school, it exacerbates
Absolutely.
the ending time for the high school. Now, if the state actually takes action and all high schools
right.
are required to start after 8:30, that will become, at least for many, a more palatable option, but that would have our high school, which currently ends at 2:40, I believe, it would have us not.
2:20.
2:20,
yeah.
sorry, yes, it had, we wouldn't be out until 3:30 or later if we were to adopt the start time for the elementary schools, or go last and adjust the other times. So if the state is going to require all high schools
That's
in the
right.
state to make a similar move, that may be an option that becomes viable again in the future. It would have placed us out of sync for things like after-school activities, primarily athletics. There was a significant pushback from the high school community around things like internships, other extracurricular activities outside of athletics, and part-time jobs, work experiences that students engage in.
As well as some families for whom high school students are
childcare.
the caretakers for younger siblings.
Yep.
Anyway,
That-
so
that issue would not be
why
addressed.
that's why that was not something that the board pursued. Although, as Dr. Freeman just noted, it is something the school start time committee took up briefly.
So those latter items that Paul mentioned together total up to, you had said that there were two reasons why.
I'm sorry, I was saying I had two answers to them, and one was that the community was, appeared to be
Right.
not in favor of that option, and the second was that there were a number of challenges to that option. Dr. Freeman just listed them. We heard again about sports, we heard about childcare issues, we heard about students working after school, and among three of the many reasons why a number of parents in the community were against that option.
If I remember correctly, there were also some concerns about our younger students being at bus stops in
In the dark.
morning, which is predominantly in various points in the year, darkness.
That is
And
true.
That was another issue that was raised.
I will say on this issue altogether, we will certainly closely be following what the state legislature does, if at all, with a proposal to create a task force, and follow that through.
Even before that, we're going to monitor a rollout in Norwalk, which looks to be making a significant change this coming September ahead of any legislative demand. And we're watching closely what continues to unfold in Greenwich, which may be moving away from the change they made and back to an earlier schedule. So we're looking to learn from the experiences of those around, from those around us.
Did you have other questions tonight before we end?
Well, that's helpful. I wanted to bring some transparency to it because it comes up in subtle ways here and there. But I think some of us in the community have felt like, well, what was the real reason? How much was an athletic schedule a driver? You know, how much, if you add up all these, this is complex, there's this, there's that, there's this reason. Does that really add up to enough to not have made the change or to not have looked more closely into it rather than a sampling at a community forum?
Well,
Which I know there were other
will
surveys
say,
done at
I
other
will say that
times.
as representatives of the community, on a subject that we thought was important, when we provided several possible approaches, if the community in fact communicates to us that one of them is the least favorable, and we have other approaches to consider, that would then not be an unusual place for us to stop on one of those approaches. We are representatives of the community, and if the community is telling us that is not the approach that we want, then that's not an approach we're going to pursue when there are others that we can consider.
Well, Dr. Bostracy, I'd also remind the community that minutes from all of the task force meetings as well as all of the Board of Education meetings at which this topic was discussed and which span over about 4 years, as well as the public forums that we held,
Right.
all of those minutes still exist on the website, as
Perfect.
does a study from the district management group that this board commissioned to have look at this, and that was probably 5 years ago now. So while I understand people still have questions about it, I would suggest that the process was really transparent. There's a lot of information
Oh,
out
absolutely.
there,
Yes, at the
although
time
we
it
have not
definitely
talked
was.
about it much of late.
Well, and that's why I just wanted to bring some transparency to it for a moment, because we're getting into the point where it's just like, it feels like a kicking the can down the road situation. And, you know, what are we waiting for? We're just waiting.
Well, I would actually portray that
So,
differently. I would say
yeah.
that Guilford's interest in action in this, in fact, sparked a lot of interest around the state, and I would suggest encouraged some of the legislative discussion that is occurring at the state. So I might describe us as a spark rather than as a district that kicked the can down the road. We made a small change. But remember, we talked a long time about, are we going to take the little bite approach or are we going to take the bold leap approach? I know that Dr. Kanapari has been involved in the conversations around state legislation, and I know that both Craig and I have been invited to speak in other districts or to either groups of superintendents or community members on the topic. In fact, I spoke at a Learn Board of Directors meeting about the shift in time, and I spoke to all of the 2 regional groups of superintendents about the shift that we made in time. So we may have made a modest change, but our modest change might have helped to create some momentum for bigger changes to come down the road.
Well, and I don't mean to not be appreciative of tremendous amounts of time
Talked
and
a
so
lot
many
about it.
people's efforts. And people reference, late night committee meetings and all these things poring over numbers and schedules and that sort of thing. But I guess it still feels kind of like, what are we waiting for? And I'm kind of from the member of the group who would like to have seen us be a flame rather than a spark. So that's, just really wanting to see more change faster.
Thank you. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else from the public who'd like to address the board tonight? All right, seeing none, I am going to entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting tonight.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All right, good night, everyone. Thank you very much.
We covered a lot of ground tonight. Thank you all.
So you preparing your
Full meeting.
work?